Hi guys, Ping Yao here. Welcome to New Falmouth and welcome to episode 11. I just have a swig of wine before I carry on. So guys, we are doing a smaller scale build today. A little bit of terraforming here. I was planning to start work on the old harbour, the historical quarter, the kind of, I guess it'd be the kind of epicenter for tourists to visit. The old harbour would be the original kind of quayside where all the ships and fishing boats and things like that will be moored, and it'll be full of restaurants and cafes and, you know, maybe a little museum as well. But as usual with this game, I managed to distract myself and I built something completely different. Well, not completely different, but certainly not what I was intending to do. The old town has obviously got a big area here, which is where the harbour will be. It hugs the coastline, and I first of all wanted to start to put down this quay here, this big kind of pier or jetty. And I knew that this jetty in particular would be where the ferry was going to be located. Now, I haven't mentioned anything about a ferry in previous episodes because, well, I just hadn't had the opportunity to mention it, but it was always something I was going to be building or planning to build. But I didn't think I'd be building it in episode 11. However, because this area is where the ferry was going to be, I kind of got sidetracked and ended up dedicating about 4 hours of my time to building a ferry terminal. So that's really where we are with this episode. It's, as I say, it's a much smaller scale episode. It's pretty much dedicated to just this little area here, and it's going to be a much more detailed build, which I think will be interesting, let's hope. The other thing is, and you're probably wondering, where's the ferry going to? Because, I mean, I've already put some bridges and things in. Well, you're about to find out where the ferry's going to. Because it was always my intention to put a little island here in the bay. So this is Falmouth Bay. And I wanted like a little kind of Martha's Vineyard type island. And if you don't know what that is, it's kind of a low-lying island with lots of kind of rural, it's quite a rural sort of place, so little guest houses and just a really nice kind of holiday vibe to it. So that's where the ferry goes, and obviously there's no bridge to the island, so the ferry is the one transportation connection link to it. So the ferry is literally just a kind of shuttle service that goes to and from the island. Now what I'm doing here, because I hadn't really played about with these ferries before, is working out how they function. And I did actually look at one of Zardas's videos on how to set up a ferry kind of network or transportation network in order to try and work out what was going on. And basically it's like setting up a bus network, but I don't usually set up public transport networks in my cities. I often don't get that far to actually make it necessary to do that. So that was quite good to do that for a change. Anybody that was eagle-eyed when you were looking at the cinematics there might have noticed a sign that I made that shows Marie Island Ferry, and that's what this is. It's Marie Island, which is obviously the island, and this is the ferry that will connect the island to the mainland. So it's very much a kind of local ferry. This is not a big terminal, it's a small kind of local terminal, and also one that maybe tourists will use. So what I wanted to do here was make a kind of little ramp, like a road ramp onto the bridge, onto the boat. So I'm using PO obviously to do this, the obligatory use of PO. I wouldn't mind doing one episode where I'm not using PO, I've got to say, but I just find it the only way to do stuff nowadays with city skylines, or certainly it's much easier to do it this way. You could possibly do it with Move It, but it would be pretty fiddly, to be honest with you. And even putting down these, I think these were PO as well. Yeah, even these lines are PO, because it just gives you that much more control. And doing stuff like this sort of little ramp onto the boat there is much easier. So how I've constructed this, if you're interested, is the base of this jetty is just a ploppable asphalt. That's all it is. Underneath is the sea, so it's not a section of land that's been terraformed with quays or anything like that. It is purely ploppable asphalt with network wall around the perimeter of it, so it is pretty straightforward. But the ploppable asphalt allows me to then add decals onto it, so I can build up the textures and give the appearance of kind of tarmac and, you know, roads and wear and tear and everything. And also I can add things like the lines to sort of demarcate the roads. So really there's no roads at this stage. Once you get to the little security gate there, that's where the roads stop. So the first thing to say is that this ferry terminal is completely non-functioning as a ferry terminal. It's completely cosmetic. It just gives the appearance of, it looks like a ferry terminal, but it doesn't actually do anything. So everything you see here is just for looks, which kind of pretty much sums up most of my cities. They're not really functioning properly. I mean, to be honest with you, New Falmouth has got huge problems. It's lacking a lot of commerce and industry, even though I seem to have done quite a lot of that recently. And a lot of the citizens are really unhappy. But occasionally I do look and just see how I'm doing with the actual game itself. But yeah, I don't tend to do that much of the actual gameplay, let's say. I'm just focusing purely on how the city looks. And if I could have a mod that simply, you know, basically just allowed me to build anything and not worry at all about any of the game mechanics, then that would be fantastic. But unfortunately I do still have to periodically check that no fires have burnt down half my buildings, and half my buildings have become abandoned, which is a semi-recurring issue I've got. And even though I've got the non-abandonment mod, it still seems to be causing some of my buildings to basically become abandoned, which is a pain in the backside, to be honest. But there you go. But anyway, back to the build, back to what I'm doing here. What am I doing here? I'm putting some more lines down, finishing off this area. So this is really the kind of the concourse, the entrance area to the ferry. And this part of the build was pretty much inspired by a few things I'd seen on Google Earth, but also a bit of a shout out to Pug Gaming, because he'd done a brilliant ferry terminal for the Isle of Wight build. If you haven't already seen, I'm sure you have. It was the episode, I think it was the first episode in his Isle of Wight series. Check out Pug's channel, because he's got some fantastic videos there, and very much gave me a lot of inspiration for this particular ferry terminal, although mine is much smaller than that build in terms of its kind of just much smaller. And then I'm putting these little kind of decaled numbers down, because obviously with ferry terminals and things like that, you generally have these lanes where the cars and vehicles wait before they go onto the ferry. So this is just kind of, as I say, just really it's just all about giving the appearance that this is a functioning terminal, when actually it doesn't really do anything. I mean, I think the ferries, there's going to be people using the ferries, but whether or not car traffic goes across, to be honest, I don't know, because I've never used a ferry in this game, so this was a new thing for me to work out what was happening with the ferries. How they actually function, I'm still slightly unsure. But yeah, so there we go. What else? Well, as you can see, I am adding quite a lot of detail to this, and New Falmouth is very much about the detail. Now, you may have seen my reboot episode for Santa Caprizia, which is my other project, and that city is a completely different kettle of fish compared to this city. Santa Caprizia is a vast urban conurbation, whereas New Falmouth is very much a small-scale, modest-sized American, East Coast American city. Much more European in flavour, I guess, because it has a lot more history to it and so forth. But yeah, that almost suggests that it needs to have a lot more detail to it because it is smaller, and therefore that's the thing I'm really going for. I'm really trying to push the detail on this city and trying to reduce some of the detail, let's say, on my other project. And I think generally that's going to be how this series now plays out. You will find that New Falmouth will be more about the details, the smaller scale builds. I would probably say the more interesting builds, because I'm going to be looking at stuff in a little bit more detail. I've got quite a lot of ideas for how the city will develop and particular builds I want to do. Whereas Santa Caprizia is more of an experiment with just trying to build a great big city, and I'm going to be trying to pull back some of the detail there. What I'm doing here, in case you wonder, is I couldn't really find a decent fence that worked for me, and all the network fences just messed up every time I tried to put those in, because, as I say, what I'm using is a ploppable asphalt, so there's no ground underneath, and as soon as you try and put networks down, it just goes wrong. So I ended up basically using PO to build my own fence, and then I've replicated this detail and used it elsewhere as well. But it sort of works quite well. It just gives the ferry terminal a sort of secure kind of fence perimeter around it, which you probably would have. The other thing that I'm going to be doing as well is a passenger terminal, because this is not just a car ferry. Of course, this is, I guess, predominantly you're going to get a lot of foot passengers going across, because the island isn't particularly very big. It's a modest sized little island, and it's mainly going to be houses. So a lot of foot traffic going over on the ferry, as well as a few vehicles. So this ferry terminal, I don't know what the building was. I think it was some kind of civic building, and maybe some kind of school, but it has a kind of contemporary look to it, and I quite like the sort of more modern appearance to this building, and I think it fits quite nicely with the sort of ferry terminal kind of theme. I'm using these pedestrian covered walkway sections here, which I didn't even know I had, and I kind of just stumbled upon them. But I think they work quite well. You can kind of create this kind of walkway waiting area for the foot traffic, let's say, to go on the boat, and also obviously PO in these to make a little sort of ramp section. So yeah, this is the passengers ferry terminal. So what I'm adding here are some floodlights and things just to illuminate this. I mean, the city generally isn't really going to be seen at night time, but I think it's quite nice to have some sort of key lights there, so that if I do some nighttime shots, then I've got areas that have specifically been designed to be seen at night. The other part of the build, away from the terminal and the ferry terminal itself, is a few little kind of warehouses and things just along the jetty here. These are in fact pretty much, the buildings I think were PO'd as well, just because I do tend to prefer to PO a lot of stuff because I have more control over it, especially if you're using ploppable asphalt with nothing underneath. It's a lot easier, although the props and things generally you can use move it with those. But yeah, I'm putting a few little warehouses and things down just to give it the appearance that it's also a working, like a working part of the harbour. Whereas a lot of the historic part of the harbour, which I am yet to build, will be more kind of like for tourists and things. So although there might be a little bit of a fishing industry going on here, I think predominantly the old harbour is very much about the sort of preservation of the history of the city itself, and also attracting tourists to fishing, fish restaurants and cafes and things like that. So that's going to be coming along in future episodes. So we're getting towards the end of this now. I'm putting a few little sort of props and boats and things in, which I think look quite good here, just to finish off the edge of the jetty, and a few little details just to break up some of the network walls around the edge of the jetty there as well. So guys, I'm going to leave you, and hope you had a nice time watching this video. I shall see you in episode 12, and no idea what I'm going to be doing in episode 12. Might do a little bit more of the harbour, maybe start the Old Town Harbour, we'll have to see. But at this stage, I'm going to bid you farewell and see you next time.